Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or search desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the podcast this week. We are going to talk about mindful parenting, and I'm super excited to have a guest here with me who is a therapist and uses mindful parenting as part of a group that she runs and work that she does with perinatal folks. We're just totally escaped me there with new parents, and I'm super excited to dive into this topic today. You know, I talk a lot about mindfulness at a high level, since I am certainly not a mindful expert in any way, shape, or form, but I feel like it's such a valuable way to look at parenting through. So anyways, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start off.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about the work that you do
Yeah.
with parents.
So my name is Sultana Karim. I am the owner and therapist at Karim Counseling Services, PLLC. So I provide individual and group therapy services, and the services can be either through online therapy, telehealth, or in person. I have an in-person office in Fairfax, Virginia, that I go to once a week for those who want to come in person to get support. I have two primary specialty areas. The first one is perinatal mental health. So that's really looking at the changes and transitions that occur for those who are trying to conceive, who are pregnant, and postpartum. And
Mm-hmm.
I work with the intersections of things that can happen. So adjusting to parenthood, as well as if someone's experiencing infertility, pregnancy, or infant loss, birth trauma. I kind of work through all of that with my perinatal clients.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other specialty is in trauma, specifically looking at childhood traumas in adults, and how that's playing a role in their lives, their adult lives.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sometimes their intermixture of that work and the perinatal mental health because we become parents and all of our stuff comes up
I was about to
as we
say
become
that's a whole intersection, isn't it? Like,
parents.
yes, dealing with our
Yeah,
own childhood trauma as we then parent our own child. And
exactly.
yeah, it's a whole other conversation.
Yes, yes. And for that specialty, it's either both. So, like, I'm working both trauma and perinatal mental health, or it can be those who may not experience, not in the perinatal mental health stage of life, but they do have childhood trauma or they experience
Mhm.
domestic and sexual violence, and I help them work through it.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. So the whole kind of, I guess, inspiration for this conversation was when I was looking at this perinatal mental health group that you run,
Mhm.
and it just looked like, oh my God, I want like every one of my clients to go through it, to be honest. I was like, "Here's everything you teach here. That
Yes.
looks amazing to me." So why don't we start off with kind of looking at the big picture of this way that you support parents, and then I'd love to
Mhm.
chat about like maybe a few of the pieces about that are a part of it.
Of course. So the group that I run is called Perinatal Dialectical Behavior Therapy, following the Strong Roots curriculum. So there's a lot of words
Yes.
to kind of talk about, but with so the idea with strong roots, that piece, it's really looking at five different parts: attachment-based parenting psychoeducation, supportive parent-child interactions, enhancing social support, connecting to cultural relevant resources, as well as self-care. And then you have the DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy, that it's this type of therapy is an intermixing of cognitive behavior therapy that looks at the interconnection between our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how when we have negative thoughts and feelings come up for us, how do we respond to certain situations? And are we aware of how our thoughts and feelings all interact with each other and impact our
Mm-hmm.
daily functioning, especially if we have things that have happened in our past, like I talked about earlier, or
Mm-hmm.
how is it essentially impacting our current behaviors and responses? And then that term dialect, it's pretty much means a combination of opposite ideas. So the DBT focus on helping people accept the reality of their lives and behaviors, as well as helping them learn to change their lives, including unhelpful behaviors, unhelpful thoughts that are happening. And with DBT, it kind of holds both. One part of it is change, and then acceptance is how do we acknowledge the things that we need to change and move to accepting our reality, accepting what is happening for us. Because when
So,
we don't move to that, it's kind of we create more suffering and pain for ourselves.
is there any similarity to like acceptance commitment therapy? Like, is
There's
there?
some aspects that are similar, and especially when we talk about radical acceptance, which is a term that's used in dialectal behavior therapy, and how we accept what is happening in this moment. We don't have to like it.
Yep. Oh, yeah. I talk about radical acceptance too. That is part of my practicing vocabulary. Absolutely.
Yes, it's like we don't have to like what's happening, but we do have to accept our reality because when we are like don't like what's happening and we choose to not to accept it, we create more suffering and pain for ourselves. And it's how do we accept the reality in this moment?
I love that. And I'm just thinking that in terms of the work that I do with parents, right? Because
Mhm.
most people don't like having a very wakeful baby. And while there are
Mhm.
pieces that we can control to try to
Yep.
optimize and bring those wakings down, right? And things that we
Mhm.
can change, there also is an
Mhm.
element of if you have a highly sensitive baby or a baby that has some extra medical complications, we're not going to get like the best version of sleep that like an abstract baby could have, right? Like we're going to have
Mhm.
higher wakes
Mhm.
if we have an uncomfortable
Yep.
baby or a highly sensitive baby or, a very intense baby. Like these are the babies that are going to wake on the higher side, even with everything as optimal as we can get. And so there's that
Mhm.
level of like accepting your journey is not going to look like your bestie's journey, right? Who maybe
Mhm.
has a really
Yep.
chill baby and doing the things that we can do to alleviate the struggle, like make it easier. And one of those I feel like is sometimes accepting what we can't control, right? Like that this is
Exactly.
your
Yep.
baby, this is their
Mhm.
temperament, this is what's
Mhm.
happening with them, and
Yep.
this is the zone that we can work in to improve things, but it's not going to look like someone else's baby necessarily.
Mm-mm. Nope. And it's how do we accept that for what it is? And being
Exactly.
able to use our resources and cope when things are not going the way we thought they would go.
Yes. And that could happen so much
Yes.
with parenting in so many different directions,
Hmm. Yep.
especially if we had very maybe unrealistic expectations. But even
Yes.
with realistic ones and a really intense baby, there still can be a pretty big gap there.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And with that, kind of going back to the group, it's broken up into four modules. So the first one is focused on mindful parenting. So we learn about mindfulness. How do we attune to our needs? Because oftentimes as parents, we put our needs on a side and focus solely on our children. And it's how do we
Hmm.
balance both and like you have all your own needs, but also your children have needs. And it's how do we
Hmm.
attend to your needs first so that you can attend to your little ones. And it's how do we cope with stress, depression, anxiety, and improve our communication about our experience, our thoughts, and feelings to other people,
Hmm.
which opens up like, I am not alone in this.
Yes.
Other people feel the same way.
Other people struggle with the same things. Yes.
Exactly, yes. And that leads into the next module, which is called Restore My Balance, which is all about understanding our brains and our body's response to stress. I haven't used the example of the hand model of the brain. So
Hmm.
when, very briefly, the middle part of the brain, specifically I'm going to talk about is the amygdala. So when we perceive that there's a threat, real and imaginary, we have big emotions, we have anxiety, or we're in a survival response, our amygdala is activated. which essentially activates our automatic nervous system, where we have sympathetic nervous system and then parasympathetic. Sympathetic is more of the flight, fight, freeze, collapse, fawn response. And then the parasympathetic is more of the rest and digest. And then we
Mm-hmm.
have that prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is this frontal part that's right above that amygdala, which is kind of the thinking part of our brain where we have resiliency, positive relationships. We're able to think through situation in a more logical manner. But the big thing what happen is a lot of us will have negative thoughts about ourselves as parents or have that mom guilt that comes up. Or let's say we have high level of overwhelm, anxiety, and stress, we flip our lid. So that higher level of thinking of being able to rationally think through situations, be mindful and all of that is pretty much deactivated. And we're
Yeah.
operating in our amygdala, which when we're operating here, we definitely have irrational thoughts that come up and we feel so overwhelmed in our environment. And the biggest piece is how do we regulate this part of our brain so that that prefrontal cortex can come back on so we can have more positive relationships, critically think through situations.
Yes. So
And then how does
important.
that look like in our body? Because our body have a visceral reaction when we flip our lid. And it's how do we acknowledge like, okay, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I have the tension in my neck, my shoulders, my lower back. Now, what do I need to help regulate? And in the Restore My Balance module, we're talking about how do we cope ahead? What are some skills that you need in those moments when you flip your lid and you're like, I don't know how to regulate my system.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of create like a toolkit of different things that you can do that's fast and immediate to get you regulated now, and then being able to manage the emotions, which leads into the co-regulation part of the module that talks about why it's important to focus on our emotions. Like, what's the benefit of it? What factors interfere with us regulating our emotions?
Mm-hmm.
How do we communicate the emotions that we have to other people that are part of our support system? And then it also incorporates some level of parenting because as parents, we we have to be able to help regulate our little ones.
Yep.
And the best way that we do that is starting with us. How do we regulate our system first to help them regulate? Making sure like they're at a safe place and regulate your nervous system so you can tend to their needs. Because oftentimes it's flipped. People are trying to regulate their crying baby, toddler who's having a tantrum, and all it is you're here. Both of you are here. You both flip your lid, and to help your child feel regulated, it has to start with you. And
Yep.
it's a skill that not all of us are taught when we were kids of how do we regulate our nervous system. And they learn for the first time in as an adult of like, how do I do that? And still be present in the moment with my child. And then
So
that
true.
leads and that leads into that 10 to the forest, which is the last module that's all about strengthening relationships with yourself, your child, and looking at moments of, so in the Strong Roots model, it talks a lot about how we have moments of branching out. So exploring the world, attending to, enjoying with our children and ourselves. But also we have those root moments at the bottom of that tree where we need that nurturing, we need that restoring our balance. And this is also an area where we repair. Because we are not perfect parents, and we're gonna be here. Sometimes multiple times a day we're here, but it's how do we acknowledge like, oh, I'm dysregulated. It came out as anger, for example, and I yelled at
Mm-hmm.
my child. And that's a big component of where we talk about repairing rupture in our relationship with our kids is how do we go back and talk through and help both yourself and your little to regulate in that system, in that um, during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's after the fact of like, let's talk about what happened and what we can do in our relationship to regulate our system. And essentially is talking a lot about tools. How do we talk to our kids in a way it's developmentally appropriate and also give them the skills to self-regulate and be able to say, I am feeling sad, mad, frustrated. Because oftentimes kids mirror us. Not often.
Yes.
They pretty much
Always.
see everything you're doing. Whether you know it or not, they're looking at you.
Yeah,
And they
absolutely.
learn from what you're doing to regulate. So when you're getting mad, do you storm off and tantrum just like they do? Or do you sit down like, ooh, mama's feeling, I'm feeling really angry right now in my chest. I'm gonna take some deep breaths.
Mm-hmm.
And 9 out of 10 times your little one may mirror the exact same thing.
So true.
Yeah.
I talk about regulation a lot because sleep is so much about regulation, right? We
Hmm.
can't get good
Hmm.
quality sleep if our nervous system's really activated.
Yep.
And our littles, pick up on our nervous system state. And
Hmm.
so if
Yep.
we're feeling really stressed about bedtime, we're not set up for, a good smooth bedtime. If we're not like we're it's not all in the parent. There's certainly other factors at
Mhm.
play, but that
Of
is one of the
course.
places that we can work and think about
Hmm.
how we're
Yeah.
parenting, but also how we're specifically parenting around sleep and like helping kind of
Hmm.
guide our kiddo's nervous system to where it needs to be
Hmm.
to get good quality sleep. And
Yep.
um I love the way that like mindfulness can kind of teach you
Hmm.
like the tools and the way to be in the moment and not
Yeah.
judge your
Hmm.
feelings and
Yep.
work on that being present. Um,
Hmm.
so
Yep.
I'd love to sort of explore that a little bit as like a parenting tool or framework
Hmm.
when we're in these, early parenting is intense. It's stressful.
Oh,
It's
yes.
a huge learning curve. So much is shifting.
Hmm.
And there's so many
Yeah,
ways we need to kind of ground in ourselves and be present at a time where it's really easy to not be
exactly.
present.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of always use the example with my clients of like, we sometimes we get stuck on what had happened or what's going to happen, and we lose track of what's happening in this moment at this time.
Mhm.
And how are you feeling in this moment? What are your thoughts that are coming up? What are the sensations that are coming up in your body in this moment and in your relationship with your child? And it's how do you be more intentional in those moments?
Mhm.
And the big thing, so I talk a lot about the hand model of the brain of like, oh, you notice you flip your lid. Now, what do you need to feel regulated? And I always start with the tool of our breath,
Mhm.
because that's the easiest, the free thing that we can do. Acknowledging one, how do you feel when you're feeling overwhelmed? What does your breath look like and feel like? And then what does it feel like when you're calm and rested? And let's incorporate more moments of that and recognizing in your body what is coming up and focusing on that area and breathing into that area.
I love that because your breath is something you can focus on whether you have a baby in your arms or a toddler on your
Mhm.
hip or you're
Yep.
setting them down for a minute in a safe place. Like it's something
Hmm.
you always have access to. Um,
Yep. Yep.
and I mean, it does actually like help
Mhm. Of
regulate your nervous system. Like there's all that lovely science around how the breath does help you regulate. Um,
course. Of course.
yeah. When you're getting a parent to focus on their breath, do you just ask them to bring that awareness or do you bring in, some of the more intent, I don't know what the right word is, like structured mindful breathing, I guess. I'm thinking of like, breathe
Yeah.
in for 4, breathe out, sigh out for 8, like that kind of stuff, or just starting
Mhm.
with that awareness.
I usually start with just the term mindfulness because it is a buzzword that a lot of people use.
Mm-hmm.
And I help to kind of just work on some of the myths related to it. Like one of them being you have to clear your mind when practicing mindfulness, when that's unrealistic because we're live beings.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we reframe that to the awareness piece of being aware of your thoughts, feelings, and sensation in this moment without judging it, without changing it, and talking about how our emotions, they come and they go. So when we choose to not acknowledge the sadness, the anger, the guilt, the shame, the uncomfortable feelings that we have, the more we push it away, the more it comes to us. So being able to be mindful and acknowledge, yep, I'm having that thought that I'm not a good enough mother. Let's sit with that feeling
Mm-hmm.
and be in the moment with that feeling. And when it's coming up, you can ask yourself questions like, when I'm feeling this way, what do I need?
I love that.
Yeah. And attuning to that piece of like, because that's the part that people struggle with is like, how do I tune to my needs when there's so much chaos happening
Yeah.
with
And I mean,
being a parent?
so much is about babies' needs, right?
Hmm.
That like
Hmm.
I think it's very easy to lose track of your
Hmm.
needs. Assuming like I mean, I think it's safe to say that a lot of adults aren't great at checking in with their own needs, period.
Right.
And then
Yep.
even if you were pretty decent at it, it's pretty easy to lose track of them,
Hmm.
especially in like the first, 6 months of parenting, but even longer
Hmm.
than that, right? When you have
Exactly. Yep.
so much attention going elsewhere, and
Hmm.
not always enough people checking in to make sure that you have what you need as a parent.
Of course. And it's how do you make that intent for yourself? I always use the analogy of like the parents are the managers of the house.
Hmm.
And if the manager is suffering and struggling, so does everyone in the home. So how do we focus on you, making sure you get what your needs are in those moments of dysregulation and flipping your lid? And how can we articulate that with those who are around you, those who are part of your support system? So that maybe, so example, could be like when you're feeling dysregulated and your spouse is coming home, you guys come up with a plan so that they maybe take the littles for an hour while you recuperate. And then
Hmm.
you kind of figure out together how do we both get breaks because parenting is hard on top of everything else that's
Hmm.
happening so that you both are attending to your own needs and connecting as a couple too, outside of being the hat of being a parent
Hmm.
and being intentional about it instead of it being, so I know some clients have like, all right, my therapist said, spend more time with my spouse. All right, checklist is done. But having the intent and actually following through with that piece of making sure that both parents or other supports who are with you get support and also get that time to recuperate, rejuvenate. And I always use like those analogies of like when we're on an airplane, they tend to say, put your mask on first, then
Hmm.
help others. The same idea when we talk about parenting, we need to put our mask on and help regulate our nervous system first so that we can help our littles.
Yeah. I see a lot. I'm sure that you see this as well, but I see a lot. Kind of like I'm going to focus on doing more things for me when insert something arbitrary in the future, right? So for me, it's usually when they're waking less, when they're sleeping through the night,
Mhm.
you know, uh, when their other parent is more able to put them to sleep for bedtime,
Mhm.
whatever sleep goal. And I feel like sometimes it's a big shift to realize that like, no, we got to focus on some of your needs now.
Now.
And maybe every single need
Yeah,
can't be met in the exact way that you would have met it before becoming a
before.
parent,
Yep.
right? But that
Yep.
doesn't mean we can't figure out like what's going on there that we can start meeting those needs so that it makes such a big difference. Like I maybe you
Mhm.
see this too, but I mean, it makes a difference even in how you feel about the sleep that you're getting, like how you take care of yourself and meet those needs affects how rested you feel, even with the exact same amount of sleep.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so
Yep.
it is really a significant step to be aware of those needs and then work on meeting
Mhm.
them,
Yeah. Yeah. I always
now.
typically tell my clients, like, let's start with the basic needs. When the last time you showered?
Yes.
Now let's put that shower in. Yes, you may have little ones that may need your attention. Let's put them in a safe place. They're going to be okay. You go take your 5 minute, 10 minute, whatever a minute shower because when you take that shower, you feel good about yourself.
Hmm.
When's the last time you drank any water?
Yes, I do this too, right? When did you eat? When did you pee? When did you have something to drink? When did you
Yep,
last like talk to another adult?
exactly.
Like
Yes, yes.
it's
And let's
good. Have a
put those
checklist.
pieces in first, and then let's see how you feel thereafter, right? Of like, they tend to feel better, like, oh, I just needed that. Yeah, you needed
Yeah,
that.
you were dehydrated and you
Yep.
had not talked to another adult all day and you haven't showered in 3 days. And
Mhm.
especially with
Yep.
like a teeny baby, right? You haven't showered in forever and like you just don't feel good in that
Good.
state, regardless of
Yep.
how tired you are or how rested you are.
Yep. And it's how do we focus on that piece? Sleep will come, especially as the baby gets bigger, things change based on their development. So it's how do you work with your part if you have a partner or a support system, how can we work with them to help you get more sleep?
Hmm.
Because research suggests when not in the perinatal period, 8 hours is efficient, but within the perinatal period, if you could get 4 or 5 hours uninterrupted sleep, can help you function better. So how can we get that chunk of sleep?
Yeah. I talk about that a lot when you're hitting a wall, that protecting that
Mhm.
4 or 5 hour stretch is both
Mhm.
lactation friendly
Mhm.
and fairly realistic, right?
Yep.
And also
Yep.
to remember that like that is not actually a rule that every single solitary person has to do. Like, because some of my
Mhm.
bed sharing families who bed sharing and like sideline nursing work quite well, they don't
Yep.
need that 4 hour chunk protected because their baby's wakes are very minimally disruptive. But
Mhm.
for a lot
Yep.
of parents, especially if you're struggling, that 4 or 5 hours is it's pretty magical.
Mhm. Yeah. And I always kind of link the sleep with our mental health. So when we're getting some level of sleep, hopefully within that 4 to 5 hour range, you'll notice the change in your mental health the next morning. So you're maybe not more agitated, easily annoyed, irritable, anxious, because you're not feeling as sleep deprived as you were before. And it's how do we protect your sleep? So that I know a lot of my clients, they look on their phones.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And it's how do we work on your sleep hygiene so that when you are feeling tired, you can actually sleep.
Yes. Yes.
Or
I
when
do.
you, yeah.
Yeah, I do a lot of that with my clients as well, right? Just that piece that like there's a whole bucket of strategies that we can work on that are just about your sleep as the
Yep.
parent without your
Mhm.
baby's sleep changing at all, which of course most people
Yep.
coming to me want to work on something
The
about their baby's
baby.
sleep. But
Hmm.
like I am a firm believer in it's not all on the baby to change, right? Like we have so
Hmm.
many things that we can do to
Hmm.
help an adult, a parent sleep better. Um,
Yes.
and it's an
Yeah.
like it's
Hmm.
like it's both. We can work on both fronts at once. And I
Hmm.
feel like that's where you get the most well-rested families is when it's not just about baby. It's about like how can we holistically as a family,
Work on it. Yeah.
yeah, take
Yeah.
each take our
Yeah.
pieces to work on, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
support ourselves as well as
Mhm.
work on optimizing baby
Yeah.
sleep, within what's developmentally realistic.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of back to that mindfulness piece.
Mhm.
You know, I love to hear your thoughts, but I feel like it's such a good piece to practice and bring in
Mhm.
as we're kind of working on our own ability to fall back asleep, right? As a
Mhm.
parent,
Mhm.
and just that ability to be aware and help our own body, relax after we've done a night feed or,
Mhm.
changed the diaper, soothed an upset baby, and then that ability to kind of downregulate back into sleep as the parent.
Yeah. Yeah. I encourage a lot of my clients, and I do like when people do work with me and we do some level of mindfulness or somatic exercises, 9 out of 10 times it'll be assigned as homework. And the idea of that is for you to continue to practice it in your everyday lives and incorporate that in your everyday lives.
Hmm.
And especially is when the idea is like to practice it in non-anxiety, non-stressful situations, so that when at the more you practice it, the better it'll be accessible when you flip your lid and feeling dysregulated. You know, oh, I need to take my deep breaths, or I need to do my progressive muscle relaxation, or whatever this t school the tool that we're working on, it'll be accessible for when you're here.
It's like strengthening a muscle or strengthening the connection, right? Like we've got to
Hmm.
do it to strengthen it for it to be a useful tool in those really dysregulated
Hmm.
moments.
Yeah. And I kind of use the analogy of like when we learn new skills, whether it's the example of riding a bike, for example, you have to keep on doing it over and over and over again to get the mechanism to get the bike going, then being able to stop the bike and turn the bike. The same
Hmm.
idea and a concept when we talk about our mindfulness and somatic skills is the more we practice it, the more it comes to us quicker when we're feeling dysregulated, and it could be utilized as a tool to regulate our nervous system.
Yeah. I, I love to just hear a little bit about sort of the role or kind of intertwining of self-compassion with mindfulness in parenting because I know I feel like it's such a valuable piece of
Mhm.
that ability to show up and be present, not judge ourselves harshly, but I'd love to hear
Mhm.
your thoughts.
Yeah. So I usually talk to my clients about how we have negative thoughts. It comes and it goes. Sometimes we get fixated on them, and that leads into a whole different ballgame of these negative cognitive distortions that come up for us. And it's how do we acknowledge what's coming up for us? What are those thoughts that are coming up? What are those feelings and sensations that are coming up? And do they stem from different things that happen throughout our lives? Whether
Hmm.
it's the thought that I'm not good enough, which can be in parenthood, I'm not a good enough mother, I'm not a good enough parent, not a good enough wife, blah, blah, blah. Or I'm not important, I'm disregarded, I'm powerless, all these different core beliefs. And how does that impact our own self-talk? And how does it also impact that parental guilt that we have?
Hmm.
And I always kind of say like the example of like we are very good at giving compassion to other people and saying all the right things, especially like a friend or family member who's upset or something's going on, but we struggle with giving the same amount of energy and compassion to ourselves.
Hmm.
Is how do we acknowledge that we, one, are human beings. We're gonna mess up. That's that's the that's just gonna what's happening because we are humans. But it's how do we talk to ourselves in a way that makes us feel good? So if we're feeling like I'm not good enough, how can we reframe that thinking to be like, well, I'm good at um being able to know when my kid needs food or wants to nurse or all these different things that you are actually good at. Because I always say,
Hmm.
like, combat every time you have that negative belief, combat it with at least two positive beliefs about yourself. And it's how to reframe our thinking to be able to give ourselves compassion. The same, and I always use with my clients is like the things you tell. So, what happens if your friend is experiencing the same thing that you're experiencing? What would you say to her or say to them? Now, I need you to say that to yourself.
Yeah.
Of like, no, you got this. You are important. You're doing a great job as a parent. You always make sure that your kid has what they need. You need that too.
Yeah.
And some of the homework is writing it down. Like, write down all the positive beliefs about yourself. And keep on telling yourself that over and over again that I am doing the best I can as a parent. I'm going to mess up, and that is okay. But I can always go back and try to repair.
I love that.
Yeah. And helping them to believe it, the more you repeat it to yourself, the more you believe it to be true. So constantly telling yourself, it is okay. It's okay not to be okay. I am doing the best I can with what I have right here, right now. I can't fix the past. I have no idea what the future holds, but I can be in this moment with what has happened.
Hmm. I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. It
Yeah.
all kind of starts with that mindful awareness and then bringing
Hmm.
those layers in,
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love
And
it.
teaching skills of like how do we reframe? Because that's the hardest part, right? Of like if you believe this to be true, the negative thoughts about yourself to be true, and it's how do we the skill of looking at the other perspective of all the things you do right, of all the
Hmm.
things that has gone well,
Yeah.
and knowing that you're not perfect, that perfect piece kind of plays a role in parenting of like, I have to be a perfect parent, or I have to follow this guideline of gentle parenting, for example, when it may not work for you, and that's okay. And it's how do we focus on like what is working for you?
Hmm.
What or how are you feeling as a parent?
Yeah. I
And,
love
and
that.
incorporating that humanness. Like we are humans. We're not robots.
I say that all the time. It's so funny. I say that all like babies are not robots, like we are not
We're
robots.
not
Yep.
robots. Yeah, yeah. And we're gonna
Absolutely.
make mistakes. It's okay to make a mistake. And some of my work with them could be because I utilize EMDR, which is eye
Hmm.
movement dissociation and reprocessing, to target those memories that come up, whereas I'm not good enough, which can stem from childhood experiences
Yep.
based on their history and what has happened in their life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So it's so important. And I don't know if you do this in your work, but like I see a lot of when it comes to those reframing, right? There's like the reframing the beliefs about ourselves, but then there's like some of the reframing beliefs about what's going on with our baby come
yes,
from misinformation. And so like there's like the cognitive reframe, but there's
yep.
also the like most of us have no idea what's normal before we become a parent. And
Mhm.
it's like that grounding in like actually your baby is doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. It's
Yep,
all those messages that are telling you otherwise. So, like not only reframing like of course you're a good parent regardless of how fussy your baby is, right? But like also
yeah.
this is why your baby's fussing and this is the normal amount of fussing and or
Mhm.
maybe this is not a normal amount of fussing. So let's get you in to figure out what's going on.
Of
Um
course.
that like just developmental normalization, I feel like is such a useful
Mhm.
tool alongside like the mindfulness stuff
Yeah,
because most of us we're very out of touch with normal young child behavior as a society and so
mhm.
it's such a need to help ground some of those expectations and ideas and perceptions that we're having about what's going on with our little.
Course. And it can be like a resource of using your pediatricians and asking them, like, is this normal?
I wouldn't do
What
that
to
with sleep or
expect?
feeding, I'll be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah.
But other milestones, sure. Sleep or feeding,
Mhm,
I am constantly telling people, like, if we're worrying about a health issue, like someone's like,
mhm,
oh, is this too much restlessness in your baby's sleep? I'm like, okay, take a video, show it to your pediatrician. But
mhm.
otherwise, I don't find them to be very, as a whole, sorry, pediatricians, there's some wonderful ones out there, including my own. But I'm
Yeah.
like, pediatricians are not sleeping and feeding experts. So go to your
Mhm,
sleep and feeding experts if you have detailed questions
mhm,
about this.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. But I think they have a lot of knowledge on like child development and be able to say, like, okay, developmentally, this is what's happening for your child. So you have realistic expectations.
Yeah.
And some of that is kind of a caveat too, because every baby is a little bit different. Some are a
Yeah.
little bit faster, some a little bit slower, and
Yeah.
that's okay. And how do you stick with that continuum and flexibility within the
Hmm.
developmental stages?
Yes. Yes. The wide range of normal, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Awesome. Well, as we're sort of wrapping up, kind of thinking about what we've touched on, is there anything you feel like is we left out or we want to kind of leave parents with as we're wrapping up this conversation when it comes to that, bringing that mindfulness in as a tool into
yeah.
parenting?
I would say the biggest one is you're not alone in this. Like, parent, there's not a manual that says this is how you're supposed to, how parenting is supposed to go, and all of these different things. And some of it, it's lived and learned experience. And
Hmm.
it's how do we incorporate skills that you need to help you regulate your nervous system to meet your base, was like we talked about that basic needs piece and
Mhm.
additional needs that come up of wanting to feel heard, seen, and just know that someone's understanding what your perspective.
Yeah. Oh gosh, being known and seen and heard, it's so important.
Mhm.
It's so important for everyone at every stage, right? Baby right up
Yep.
through the lifespan.
Span. Yeah. Yeah. Because we all strive to want to be seen and heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I will absolutely get all the info from you and put it in the show notes, but do you want to shout out where folks can find you on the internets?
Yes, of course. So the first contact is my website at www.karim, Karim, counseling, counseling.org. I'm also on both Instagram and Facebook, where I put information about mental health, the perinatal mental health, but also the intersection of trauma. So I have blogs, I have quotes and affirmations that you can utilize, as well as coping skills and mindfulness skills to regulate your nervous system. So it's all on there. And it's at Kareem Counseling on both
Awesome.
Facebook and Instagram.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all your thoughts and your wisdom around mindfulness. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.